Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Carrington, and you're listening to Call Talk for December 15th, 2016. Today's topic is culture and agent compliance, rules versus trust. And of course, if you're listening live, I'd like to invite you to be a part of the show and ask questions. And the easiest, best way to do it is just to email me directly. And do that at brian@benchmarkportal.com. That's spelled out BRIAN at benchmarkportal.com. Of course, I want to remind you that all of our shows are archived and available to listen to at any time that's good for you. And you can find them on our website at benchmarkportal.com. So, without further ado, let's jump into our show. It's my pleasure to introduce the host of Call Talk, Bruce Belfiore.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome back to Call Talk, everyone. Today's topic is culture and agent compliance, rules versus trust. This is a perennial balancing act for people who are responsible for other people, right? I mean, your own kids, the sports teams you coach, the scouts you lead, and of course, the people that you lead at work. How much do you hem them in by rules, and how much do you let them run on trust? It's often a struggle to figure out how to get the right balance, and many managers have been hurt by situations in which they've trusted people too much or have been humbled by situations in which they've erroneously relied too heavily on rules. So we brought an expert on the topic for you here, Marge Robba. Welcome to the program, Marge.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversations.
Okay, great. Well, just by way of introduction, Marge brings a rich multicultural background to her work, having had international assignments in Argentina, Brazil, Italy, Mexico, the Philippines, and the UK. Marge has worked extensively with airlines, as well as in management for a mega American Express call center. She was Director of Global Customer Service for MasterCard and has worked with Gateway Computers, People Support Outsourcing, and AAA in Arizona. She's consulted for numerous companies and is a senior consultant with BenchmarkPortal. She's also fluent in Italian, so Marge and I toyed with the idea of just doing the show all in Italian with maybe some interludes sung by Andrea Bocelli. But Brian nixed that one, right, Brian?
No way, yeah.
It could have been fun, but anyway. Okay, Marge, let's jump right into it. And before we get into the purely management aspects of rules and regulations, I want to ask you about the legal elements also that we need to be aware of, because contact centers today are facing ever-increasing compliance requirements such as PCI, HIPAA, and from a performance perspective, with personal texting, social media, web surfing, what are some of the things management needs to take into consideration in creating policy and management practices around all of these challenges?
Well, it's certainly a challenging topic, and part of it is you, as you mentioned, you do have the legal aspect of it. So there is this PCI compliance, which, with all the hacking and all that goes on, becomes ever more important to make sure that you've protected your clients and customers. And then, of course, if you're in the health field, the whole HIPAA requirement of keeping information confidential. The other compliance pieces are the more performance-oriented pieces where you're looking at people's use of cell phones on the floor, looking to create a paperless environment to comply with the PCI HIPAA requirements. So it becomes really complicated and multifaceted. I have a lot of clients that have asked me to help them create their policy around this, and they expect a one-size-fits-all, and it really doesn't. It becomes a culture issue more than anything else.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's sort of that sixth sense of where are there issues of risk, where are there issues of confidentiality, and sort of have everybody on board looking for them and trying to do something about them instead of just saying, okay, there's this manual you can open and it will tell you exactly what to do.
That's exactly right. And it's finding that balance. You mentioned in the opening talking about the balance between rules, which obviously, especially from a legal perspective, you're going to have rules around PCI compliance, and then also around the trust element of your staff and employees. So from a culture perspective, I take a look at what is the culture of the organization before we even look to create policy, and what the strategic intent of that policy is. What I've found with a lot of contact centers is that they're created as issues occur. So they'll have a phone policy about keeping your phone off the desk. And then later on, they'll find out that they had some issues with web surfing. So they'll create a web surfing policy. And they're all these little hits. So one of the things I ask them to look at is to create a more strategic view to their policy around social media. So what's your strategic view for legal and your strategic view for social media?
Yeah, no, so that stepping back and taking a look at, okay, what is it that we have to fulfill in terms of our strategic needs for the regulatory side and for the risk management side and for the just good sense side? How do we bring all that together? And I guess communicating that to your people too is key, because if they understand that this is, to be in compliance with a law that's for good reasons, right? Or it's a policy that has really good reasons behind it. If you've communicated those policy reasons, those legal reasons, et cetera, then you have them on board with you more.
That's exactly right. And the goal is not, realistically, the goal should not just be compliance, but commitment to the security that's involved in PCI and HIPAA, and the commitment to good customer service when it is from a performance perspective. So although we talk about compliance, I always have the companies I work with focus on commitment rather than just compliance.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot, the idea of commitment to security, commitment to good customer service, not just the compliance side. And that brings people in. And again, even if they are rules, they don't feel as much that they're rules, external rules that are imposed, but rather they're, commitments that you're being entrusted with as an agent.
That's exactly right. And that's why culture becomes important, because, and I'm not going to say there's a right and a wrong culture for an organization. Cultures can be very different, but still be good for that organization. If you take two similar organizations like Federal Express and UPS, you'll see that their cultures are different, but it works for them. So I don't go in and critique a culture necessarily. But what I do is look and see if they are more of a command and control culture or more of an open culture. There needs to be some balance, obviously, but you need to be able to take a look at the culture as a whole. Peter Drucker, the management guru from the early years, who still, I think he was clairvoyant in his predictions, said culture will eat strategy for breakfast. So you can create all your strategy you want around social media and so forth, but if you don't have a culture that is supportive of that, it's not going to work.
Okay, and so the people listening to this are the ones who have either inherited a culture, are responsible for creating a culture, may have to turn around a culture. Have you seen situations that might be instructive for our listeners in terms of how to imbue a culture, or maybe even turn around a culture where necessary on these issues?
Absolutely. The first thing I ask a company to do is to take a look at their current compliance policies and how successful are they? Are they getting the compliance that they're looking for? If they are, then that's already a positive step. If one of the reasons they bring, consultant in is because they're not getting the compliance that they need, then I look more closely at the culture to say, are there things in the culture, like unwritten rules? Are there unwritten rules in your culture that are stopping, are getting in the way of the compliance?
And how about us as managers? how should we hold ourselves responsible in terms of modeling behavior, in terms of sort of setting the right tone, communicating the right way? What are your thoughts on that, Marge?
Well, absolutely. I went into one organization where they kept saying to me, well, Level has its privileges, and managers should be able to do this and that, and it doesn't matter if the front line, it doesn't matter that the front line have different rules. And people will decide whether they trust a company or not by the way the frontline management behaves. The biggest challenge in corporations nowadays is the fact that not enough are taking time to calibrate with their frontline management. So as with anything, you create a policy around as an example, cell phones on the floor. They're not allowed to be on the desk. You have some supervisors who walk by and make excuses for some people, and then you have other supervisors who are going to run the rule as it's supposed to be. If you have that kind of variable and inconsistency in your organization, you're creating a lack of trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the behavior of the frontline management becomes critical.
And those calibration sessions, how should those be handled in your opinion? Is it the kind of thing where somebody says, look, we have to have consistency, and so this is the way it's going to be, or we have to have consistency, so let's talk about how we're going to do this, or how have you seen that done successfully?
The most successful way I've seen is a collaborative effort around. I would hope that most contact centers, or that all contact centers out there, calibrate on a regular basis around, as an example, their monitoring form. So they would jointly listen to a phone call, everybody scores it independently, and then there's a conversation about how the scores were compared to others. It's the same with a policy. You create a policy, you discuss the policy and get commitment from the front line, and then you make sure that the frontline management understands what the compliance looks like and their commitment to it. I was in a contact center when I was working within the corporate environment. We had the no phone policy, and some of the directors, I was one of the directors at this company, and we had multiple directors. It was an outsourcer. I would do walkarounds and make sure that the phones were not on the desks. Other directors would not require walkarounds by their managers, so they got a little lax. My group didn't get lax. So it's that, if we make a commitment, then it has to be consistently monitored across the organization or the contact floor.
Well, one of the things that I find, too, is that oftentimes there's something that is decided or kind of decided in a group meeting for calibration purposes, and then is kind of forgotten over time. And then there's other things that come up, and they kind of displace whatever's there, et cetera. And one of the things that I've taken to lately, as Brian can tell you, is putting things on Google Docs where everybody can get a hold of them, and you have a spreadsheet with whatever the issue is, and then what the decision is, and who's responsible for the decision, and any follow-up that needs to be done, as well as any dates that might be there as well. And because just to inject a little bit of Italian into this, you know the concept of aria fritta, no? Where where something is said or done, and then it just goes into fried air. It sort of goes off into the atmosphere and is forgotten. And that's where you get to a point where, and I'm sure people listening to this will be able to relate to it. A few months later, you say, "Oh yeah, we talked about that. Oh yeah, we decided that." Well, yeah, but one group is doing it, another group isn't doing it, and another group is sort of doing it. And we can't really remember exactly what it was that was decided anyway. And so if you have calibration that is also sort of connected with certain decisions, and those decisions are reduced to writing, not long theses or anything, but just bullet points in a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet is something that you look at and hold yourself accountable every time you get together. then that's one way of making sure it doesn't turn into aria frita, but in fact becomes part of the policy and the culture of the center. What do you think about that, Marge?
No, absolutely. So, as an example, I spoke about unwritten rules, and what you're talking about is creating a policy or procedure, and then over time it wears down to people aren't doing it. That's how the flavor of the month comes out. Everybody gets really excited about something. They initiate it, and then I look at policies and procedures like plants, right? You can plant the plant, but if you don't go back and water it every once in a while, it's going to die.
Yep.
And that's the same thing with policies and procedures. And what often happens is rather than going back and watering, they create a new policy. And then they create a new policy. And then they create another policy. And it just becomes, you can't layer. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever taken wallpaper off of a house that's been around for 80 years, but layer after layer is not a good system in a contact center. Less complicated policy, crisp and supported, is much more functional than these layers upon layers of policy.
Yeah, so that's why I agree 100%. That's why, a spreadsheet which is, very much given over to bullet points, not long prose, but something that is clear, concise. You can put in different columns, who's responsible, what the dates are, et cetera. And then, of course, when the time comes that policy should be changed or it goes out of date or something like that, then do it. There's nothing that says that it's the U.S. Constitution and you got to get 3/4 of the states to agree to a change. It's something that through discussion with your management group you can definitely change. But at least it's changed on an organized basis and on an agreed basis instead of being, as you put it, the flavor of the month.
Absolutely, and I'm a firm believer in expiration dates. So when I go into a contact center and we start talking about rewriting policies and procedures, we put an or a review date, and we space them out throughout the year so that you're not all of a sudden looking at your entire handbook in one sitting, but that there is a continual look to it.
Yeah. So the idea here is that sort of spring cleaning is appropriate any time of year if something needs to be changed. And if you have it there, it's written down, people look at it on a regular basis. And there aren't thousands of them. There shouldn't be. There should be, a fairly limited number of things that people are being held accountable for. And if something gets passé or is no longer, appropriate, then you clip and paste that into a, archive part of your spreadsheet. And that way you can just concentrate on the top 5 or top 10, whatever is up there. So, let me ask you this, Marge. What does all of this, when you go into a company and you look at what they're doing, et cetera, what does it tell you about a company as you go through these elements?
Well, one of the things that I do is just to kind of get an idea for the company is I usually ask for the dress code of the company. Because that tells me a lot. I walked into one company and they had a 3-ring binder, a 3-inch 3-ring binder around dress code, and that is that to me is a command and control, and I'm going to write rules until you get it type of company. So it tells me a lot. And I started doing that because I actually I had the good fortune of going to a seminar at Disney University in Orlando, and one of the things we talked about at that seminar was how do you manage dress code in a company, which is always a touchy subject. And what I liked about what they did, and they have a fascinating new hire program. But anyway, the applicants come into this big auditorium, and of course this is Disney, so they have these videos that they play. But all they simply do, they do 2 things that caught my eye. They first show a table, and they throw keys or a bus pass on the table. And they say, as long as you have one of these two, you'll have no problem here, which they're sending the message that we expect you to show up for work. And then they took the same person, put them in business attire or casual business attire, and then more clubbing attire or that kind of stuff. And they said, if you look like this when you come to work, no problem. If you look like this when you come to work, we'll have a conversation.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because you probably noticed that sometimes, and I'm sure this will resonate with a lot of people on the phone, there is a generational, difference here, and certain sort of ingrained senses of what's appropriate and what's not seems to have changed over time.
Absolutely, and that's always a challenge, and it's difficult for the more mature management team to let go of some of those issues, and for the younger group not to get as frustrated with the changeover from one to the other. But companies have also experimented, obviously, with dress code and all of that. But that's why I look at things to see if it's a rules-dominated, because the challenge becomes this. The more rules you put in place, the less people think. And nowadays, because it's all about knowledge workers, not actually physical laborers, especially in contact centers, you want people to actually be able to think quickly and respond quickly and not be rules guided necessarily. So you want that balance between the two, and that's what compliance is all about.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of companies have these unwritten rules that guide behavior, some in a good way, sometimes counterproductive, and sometimes it's just the way it's expressed, isn't it? The way the management team thinks about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It's the verbiage becomes critical. So one of the things that I also look at is how things are written. So are things written with positive intent? If you look at the term, parents use this a lot with kids. And it happens in contact centers still where, parents will say, don't let me catch you, and then you can fill in the blank. Well, don't let me catch you is not a positive intent statement. And it's the unwritten rule is if as long as you do it and I don't see it, you can get away with it. So don't let me catch you does not instill any kind of accountability, ownership, or commitment to making something right. It actually, especially depending on the personality of the child, actually is a dare.
Right.
Just don't let me catch you. So can you get away with it without it? So the unwritten rules become really how the contact center will govern itself. Wow.
Yeah. No, that's so important. And treating people like adults and then having them take responsibility and accountability like adults is so important, and therefore the words that we use, as you're so attuned to, are so important. Well, good. We're going to be getting over to some questions that Brian has, but is there any other thought that you wanted to add before we get to the questions?
No, that's really the main thing is to look at your current state, how compliant, committed your staff is, and are you a more rules or more accountable-driven organization, and then write your policies accordingly.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, these are great insights, and let's see what Brian has in terms of questions. Over to you, Brian.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. You just mentioned positive intent, so I'm going to start with this one. Chris wrote in, how do we check if we're communicating with positive intent?
Great. Great question. I love talking about positive intent. You look at the best thing to do is look at your policies and your forms to start with. And I always start with the monitoring form. I go in and look at the monitoring form. If your monitoring form is your sentences are in the form of questions, then you're actually in doubt that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. If your monitoring form is in positive statements, those are positive intent statements. So as an example, did the agent close the call correctly? So that's, so did they or didn't they? Whereas if you say the agent closed the call correctly, that's a positive statement. If it's positive, then great. And if it's not bad, but it's an area of improvement. And then again, it's a positive statement. So monitoring form is the quickest way to take a look at it. The other things are verbiage and policies, how you write your performance appraisals, how you have conversations during your monitoring process. If you are a telling organization, telling tends to be pretty forceful and not always from a positive intent. I'll give you an example that I helped with one of my managers in a previous job. He did not play well in the sandbox. People did not like him because every time they came up with an idea, he would say, well, that's not going to work because. That's a negative statement. I asked him to change his verbiage because he was always spot on, but he just turned people off. So I asked him to say instead, in order to make this work, this is what we need to change. And overnight, it made such an impact on people because now you were positioning as something possible, not something not possible.
Wow, that's great input there. And thinking about monitoring, if we change the concept there to mind opening, because that's what we're trying to do. What you obviously did with that person was to open his mind to the way he was communicating. And if we are opening minds of agents, supervisors and agents to how they're doing it, then we're monitoring. We're going from monitoring to mentoring, and that's really one of the things that we want to do here. So yeah, great.
Absolutely.
And I have one more that is related to intent, so I thought I'd throw this in now too from Sage. Sage asking now, what do you mean intent before content?
So when you're writing policies or you're going to explain to people, the way you move them from compliance to commitment is for them to understand the reason why. So if you just throw a rule out there without explaining the reason why behind it, people don't have a way to connect with it. So, and it's also a very typical customer service type of thing that if you're going to explain something to a customer, giving the intent of something before actually saying something. So as an example, in a compliance policy, if the idea is not to keep your phone on the desk, that your phone has to be put away during your time at your desk, you can say you have to keep your phone off the desk, and that's the policy. But giving the intent beforehand is our customers expect, and we want to give them our full attention. Phones beeping on top of the desk are distracting. So therefore, our policy is that phones have to be put away while you're on a call or while you're sitting at your desk. So now you're explaining why, and it gets them to be more engaged. Well, yeah, I need to be focused on my customer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes great sense, and I think it's really good input for our listeners. So, yeah, do you have one more call? Because we're getting to the bottom of the hour here. One more question, Brian?
Yeah, you bet. I got one more from Sydney, and it's all about the unwritten rules, right? How can I find out what some of our unwritten rules are?
Yeah, that's going to take a little digging, but and they come in all sorts of forms. So when I was part of a consulting project, I was working with some people, and part of the challenge was that they would have these projects that were fairly long in duration, a couple of months, And they were very stressful for people because they never seemed to get done until the very last. At the 11th hour, everybody chips in, works 24 hours, kind of like college kids do when they cram for an exam. Let's get it all done. And it was very stressful for the organization. So as part of the culture assessment and whatever, I took a look at it, talked with a lot of people on projects. What was happening is that the unwritten rule was that if you want to get recognized, you have to wait till the very last minute and pull an all-nighter, and then you will get all sorts of recognition from upper management. If your project was pacing along well, you never got recognition for that. So what they ended up doing was changing their rewards and recognition programs to celebrate milestones and again, from a positive intent perspective, if you truly want a positive intent organization, you do not focus on what's not working. You focus on what is working by ignoring what's not working globally, and then address it individually. You take the focus off. So it's like, little kids screaming and yelling in a store. The more you tell them to stop, the louder they scream. So you want to not look at negative behavior. So by looking at the milestones and creating that kind of recognition within I think the project that they started right after we had this aha moment with the senior management team, they were able to see the improvement as soon as they handed out that first recognition for hitting a milestone. And it caught on very quickly. And they were able, not always easy to change culture, but in that particular perspective, they were able to change it really quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's where a spreadsheet could come in handy, too, in terms of setting out milestones and sort of parsing things out. I love that idea. I think that's great. And the amount of angst that you can get rid of by doing things that way, and also the amount of money you can save by doing things properly on this is pretty amazing. If you have a company that's run on culture in terms of being compliant, etc., instead of running on rules, the money that you can save can be enormous, and that's where sometimes having a consultant come in and take a look at things and make some suggestions can actually pay some really big dividends. So, this has been great. I mean, tons of really good insights. We really appreciate this, Marge. Unfortunately, we've come way too soon to the end of our half-hour program here, but thank you very much. Are there any final things you'd like to say?
No, the best thing to do is assess your organization, decide what your strategy is, and make sure that you have a culture that will support that. Mm-hmm. And then life will be good.
They're very good. Okay. Life will be good. Absolutely. Okay. Well, molte grazie. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Prego.
Grazie. Okay. Fantastico. Okay. With that, we'll pass over to Brian and to wrap things up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bruce. So, Marge, let me ask you if this sounds right and it's done with the correct intention. Brian intends to end the show. Positively
that
intends
is clear
to wrap up the show. All right, good.
Yes, that's right.
Just checking. Love it. Thank you to Marge and Bruce for another great show on Call Talk, and also just another reminder that we have lots of different topics that we approach on Call Talk over the last 5 years we've been doing the show. So if you're working on a certain initiative, I'm sure we have a show that's going to match that. So check that out on BenchmarkPortal.com in our Call Talk archive sections. So, of course, from all of us here at Benchmark Portal, keep those headsets steady and your fingers ready. This is Brian Carrington signing out. Have a great day. Okay, now I'll end the show. Take care.